Okay, and share my slides. Okay, so again, welcome to Female Entrepreneurship Job Research Seminar. We are hosting it in the Jake Jobs College of Business and Entrepreneurship. The seminar is recorded. And today we have a wonderful guest, Josh Feng, and he's going to talk about female innovators and if they create different new goods, which is a wonderful topic. I'm really excited to hear about it. And Dr. Feng is from the Department of Entrepreneurship and Strategy from University of Utah. Okay, Josh, if you want to start by introducing yourself, and I'm going to stop sharing my slides. So if you would like to introduce yourself in a few words, and yeah, just go ahead. Let's hear your presentation. You can share your slides now.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Agnieszka, and thanks to everyone for attending this this session. So I guess a few words to introduce myself. So as Agnieszka mentioned, I'm at the University of Utah. I'm generally interested in issues of intellectual property, entrepreneurship, and some stuff on the life sciences industries as well. So you can look at my website or whatnot to get a better sense of things I work on. So I guess today I'm going to present a paper that's kind of a bit broader than the description I sent out via the email, but I'll try to focus on the themes that I've seen throughout this seminar series. I guess the last two that I was here for, and then just give you a sense of what the rest of the paper looks like. But it would be great to get all of your feedback on additional data collection, for example, or additional mechanisms or questions that might be kind of particularly important to understand or to get answers to. So please feel free to interrupt at any point during the presentation with questions. I know at the end we'll also have a discussion. So again, thank you, and I'll kind of get going with some background and some context on this study. So kind of really big picture, the direction of innovation is something that's of primary interest to innovation scholars, to economists, to a lot of practitioners. It's kind of a fancy way to say, well, what kind of new goods does the innovation system produce or give us? And basically, like, how did we get here? Where are we going in the future? And so our paper tackles a much smaller question. We try to figure out whether innovators and entrepreneurs, whether their social backgrounds matter for the direction of their innovative activity. And so to put a little bit more meat on that, so why do we think that an innovator's social background might matter for what they work on and what types of new goods they create? There's some conceptual grounding that's based on things in the literature. Ideas are an important input into innovative activity. People with different upbringings and social interactions are going to be exposed to different ideas, know different things about people's preferences. There's also kind of evidence in the literature that personal experience matters for applying new technology, and there's some case studies that people have done showing that people say work experience influences how they apply 3D printing and what problems they apply 3D printing to tackling. And finally, there's also a lot of anecdotal evidence. So many of you will have read about profiles of entrepreneurs and inventors, and it seems like from a lot of these profiles that innovators solve problems based on personal experience. So here I've shown Josephine Cochrane, who was the inventor of the dishwasher in the 19th century, and she was part of the upper class in America and had these like very expensive dishes that she had to wash after all the parties that she hosted. And she just said, well, like maybe we can design something to help me and my friends take care of something that we don't like taking care of, or we don't really want to deal with it. But I guess they were at the time assigned that particular role. And there's many other examples of people. I've listed a couple here of kind of female entrepreneurs tackling problems that are either personal or that their friends have experienced. And so that's some motivation for why we might think inventors or entrepreneurs create new goods that are address their own needs or people in their social circles. The question becomes relevant because of some of the things we've seen in this seminar series before. So as many of you in this audience know, women, minorities, and individuals from low SES backgrounds are underrepresented in the US innovation system. So, for example, women consist of 12% of patent inventors, 18% of workers in the tech industry, and startups with any woman founders receive about 12% of VC funding. And we also have similar issues in terms of socioeconomic background and also significant regional differences in entrepreneurial activity. And so the existing literature provides a variety of explanations for this unequal access to the innovation system. And so that includes discrimination, preferences, and intergenerational transmission of human capital. We're going to kind of take that as given that there's these barriers or these frictions that lead to an unequal representation within the pool of innovators, at least in the US, but it's kind of true generally as well. So the question is, in a world where the social push channel is relevant, the kind of idea that people innovate based on their own experiences, if that is true, then this kind of unequal access to the innovation system is going to lead to missing innovation for underrepresented groups. And if you want to describe it in a different way, it will lead to inequitable growth. So the innovation system isn't providing new goods in a kind of equal way across different groups in the population. And so that was kind of to set up the quick background. That's a lot of kind of anecdotes and piggybacking off of a lot of great work that people have done. So what we're trying to do in this paper is to provide systematic empirical evidence on whether this social push channel holds. And so in step one of the paper, what we do is to provide descriptive evidence on the relationship between innovator demographics and the demographics of consumers they end up selling to if they bring their products to market. And what I'll do today is focus on female entrepreneurs and female patent inventors and kind of show you a couple of slides on geography and socioeconomic background as well, which also have come up as issues in this seminar series. Step two, I'll briefly describe a quasi-experiment that we set up to kind of vary a person's social background and see if that changes the direction of their innovative activity. So I'll briefly note that design. It doesn't directly speak to female entrepreneurship, but it kind of illustrates the more general point that background has a causal effect on what people work on. And then step three, I won't get to that today, but essentially we construct an extended growth model from economics, but we extend it in a way to think about the impact of unequal access and the social push channel for growth and inequality. But that I won't get to, but if you want to take a look at the paper, we try to illustrate and quantify the impacts on inequality and speak to issues in equitable growth. So before I dive into the rest of the paper, I can take a quick pause just to clarify any issues that might have come up as I went through the intro pretty quickly. So please feel free to jump in.
I think we are all good, Josh. You can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you.
I don't see any
And so
chat.
let me move on to the empirical evidence that we've collected then on this front.
Oh,
So the step one of the paper is to collect as much descriptive evidence as we can about this social push channel. Um, so we have kind of two sets of data that we then try to combine. So on the left side of the screen, you'll see the data we've collected on innovators. So one starting point of this is to use Crunchbase, which is an open source, widely available startup data set. And so that particular data set is focused on venture-backed startups with a few other ones mixed in. So um, I fully acknowledge that that's a limited context, especially given some of the other presentations in this series. But that data set has data on each startup, the gender of the founders. We also did some manual collection of race and age as well. There weren't too many kind of minority um, entrepreneurs from minority groups, at least in the couple of settings that we study, which is kind of unfortunate, but also prevents us from studying that issue more. We also see the venture capital partners that fund the startups and their demographics. So I'll have one slide on that. Um, and we also then think about other kind of broader data sets. So first we look at the PSID, which is also a publicly available data set. It's a survey of people, but over time, and that allows us to connect entrepreneurs or at least self-employed individuals to data on their parents' characteristics. And then we also collect data on the USPT from the USPTO to think about patents and the gender of inventors and some data on age. So that's the left side. We have some think of that as just characteristics of innovators, so entrepreneurs and patent and inventors. And then on the right side, we have data on consumption. So the first data set I've listed there is the Consumer Expenditure Survey, which is also publicly available. You can think of this as data on consumption shares of different groups across industries. So you can see, well, this industry sells more to women or to older individuals. And so there we kind of have industry level information on consumption. And then we have two additional data sets that are at a much more granular level. So first we have data from Nielsen scanner data, which some of you might be familiar with. It tracks household consumer packaged goods purchasing at the product level. So think of each product as a barcode. And that's kind of one data set. We see the exact good that different households are buying. And then the second data set is at an even more granular level. So the scanner data is at the household level. The next data set we have is this Nielsen EMM data set. And that data is at the individual level. It tracks individuals' phone app usage. So it'll be like Josh, some app, and then how much I used a given app in a given month. So we have that data for a 2 and a bit year period. And so this is a new data set that I don't think many people have used. It's a little bit expensive, so we haven't been able to extend the data set kind of into more recent years. But the upside of this is it's more specific. Each person, typically, people don't share phones. And then it's more technological maybe than consumer goods. So it ends up having more venture-backed startups that make phone apps that appear in this data set. And then what we do is then merge these two columns. So on the macro side of things, think this is at the industry level. What we do is then look at an entrepreneur, see the industry that they're working in, and then link that to the consumption statistics associated with that industry. We also do this with patent inventors, where we go from inventor to patent class, then to industry using this crosswalk. That's kind of a text-driven crosswalk between patent clause and industry, and then to consumption statistics. And to give you a sense, we just have 325 consumer-facing industries, and then those are our data points. And then we run a bunch of regressions looking at the average demographics of inventors that work in that particular industry versus the average demographics of the consumers out of that industry. And then we also do this at the micro level. So we go from entrepreneur to the startup that they founded, and then to the products that they ultimately bring to market. So again, this is a selected set of people who are successful in bringing their product to market. And then we go from the product to very detailed consumption statistics based on the two Nielsen data sets. So in the phone apps data set, we have about 1,700 venture capital backed startups. And then in the consumer packaged goods is a much more narrow set of venture backed startups, about 160, but each of them sell kind of more products, or at least more barcodes, so more varieties out of each one. And so another thing we do is go from patent inventor to the company they're working in, to the products sold by that company, and then to the purchasing statistics. So that's something else that we do to go a little bit beyond just venture-backed entrepreneurs. And so the analysis is going to just be a simple regression doing that particular comparison between consumer share of a given demographic versus innovator share of a particular demographic. So nothing too crazy. Sometimes we control for product group fixed effects to look within a particular product group. Think light beer, or think online dating apps, and then just compare, well, if an online dating app was started by a female entrepreneur versus a male entrepreneur, does the female entrepreneur have more female users of her particular app? And so just to illustrate that idea more graphically, this is a plot using the phone apps data. So each data point is going to be a phone app that's created by a venture-backed startup. And what we plot here is the female usage fraction of a given app. So 1 is like all the users are women, and 0 is all users are male. And in red, we have the female-founded startups, and in white, we have the male-founded startups. And as you can tell, the red bars are kind of shifted over across the right. So on average, woman-founded startups make apps that have about 20% more woman consumers than their male-founded counterparts. So about 60% versus 50% female usage on average. So obviously it's not like stark, it's not all the red bars on the right or all the white bars are on the left, but you can at least see a systematic pattern here across kind of almost 2,000 startups. And the context here, as I mentioned earlier, this is not my work, but just people in this audience and other people's work have shown that women entrepreneurs are underrepresented. And here we see the same thing. So 16% of phone app startups have at least one woman founder, and only 5% are all female. So again, there's kind of a skew or like unequal access applies in this particular context. So we can then show the formal regressions. They pretty much show kind of same thing, especially within a particular category. You see this pattern. So again, kind of within dating apps, for example, Bumble versus like Tinder or something like that. We also see big home state effects with apps, which probably isn't too surprising on the one hand, but on the other hand, phone apps are nationally distributed, and distribution costs aren't so expensive, but we still see a huge home state effect. So if you're a startup based in Minneapolis, you're much more likely to serve customers who live in Minnesota, for example. We also provide the same statistics within the consumer packaged goods industries, and again we find female founders are more likely to sell to households with a female head of household. And again, the effect is about like 20%, so kind of 4.7 percentage points on a mean of 0.25. We've also done kind of different versions of that, like weighting by the gender of the different members of the household, looking at just single individual households, and we find similar patterns across those. We also find similar results for female patent inventors. So if a company has more female patent inventors, they're also more likely to, that's correlated with being more likely to sell to female consumers. And here I've thrown in an extra result, which is about age. So we find that like 1 year older founders are, at the time of founding, the age of the founder is correlated with selling to older individuals, although it's not clearly not 1 for 1. It's more like 1 for 0.13, something like that. So that's kind of the results using the really detailed product level data. In the interest of time, I'll just go over this very quickly. But we also have produced some additional results on funders. I get those two words confused very easily. So venture capital partners are obviously also a very skewed population. And we do find that female founded startups are more likely to be funded by a female venture capital partner. Other papers have pointed this out as well. But we do find that both factors are predictive of female user fraction in the phone app sample. So if you kind of run a horse race between female founder versus female funder, both are positively predictive of that startup selling more to women down the road. And so that speaks a little bit to maybe funders also having a role in the direction of innovation or the types of new goods that are created. And so I know there's been a lot of initiatives out there, especially by VC firms, to hire more female venture capital partners, and that might have two kind of effects. But again, this is all correlational, so I'm not claiming that this is causal, that if you hire more female venture capital partners, you'll get more female founded startups and kind of just in general more goods geared towards women. But that's a potential possibility. Again, just to hurry through, we also present evidence across industries, thinking about socioeconomic background, so parent income versus whether you end up working in a luxury goods versus necessities. We also find it for female inventors, thinking about female inventors and how likely they are, the fraction of female inventors in an industry versus the consumption share of women in an industry. And we find pretty strong correlations there. So inventors are more likely to work in industries where people like them represent a larger share of the consumers. The two different approaches kind of yield different estimates, but that's partly sample size, partly precision, and maybe within the CompuStat sample, that's like inventors working at large companies, maybe they have less autonomy over the direction of what they work on. That's something I'd like to dig into a little bit more, but I haven't come up with a good study design to think about that. We also came up with a couple of additional results to think about social impact or externalities. Those are kind of important issues in the direction of innovation. So we find that female inventors are, at least in the USPTO sample, are more likely to work on clean energy patents versus traditional energy patents. So that's a potential kind of a more general story in terms of what I'm covering today, but that's not a huge part of the paper. But again, it relates to some of the earlier presentations that have noted that women are more motivated maybe by kind of social impact and having a positive externality as well as making more money. We also find differences in descriptions of these companies. Again, this isn't probably is not very novel, but within all Crunch-based companies, companies with female founders are more likely to mention B Corp in their description, healthy, sustainable, and also kids as well. Although some of these kid startups are also couples that are starting companies. So just to, I've kind of gone through that somewhat quickly so that we have time for discussion at the end. But to summarize those findings, so first at the micro level, we compare at the product level, products created by female founded startups versus male founded startups. And sometimes we compare it within product categories like energy bars or dating apps. And what we find is entrepreneurs create new goods for consumers of similar gender, age, and geography with pretty sizable correlations. We also find this across consumer-facing industries. So strong correlation there in terms of the average innovator demographics and the average consumer demographics, both in terms of parental income versus consumer income, and also gender and age again. And other important correlations also exist, as I alluded to in the last couple of slides. So I talked about women founders, women venture capital partners, and then also kind of more generally important directions of innovation. So potentially we care a lot about clean energy or sustainability or kids. So these are all, at least coming from an economics background, like health, children, and environment are kind of their subfields that we think of as being particularly important and full of positive externalities. So I think there's further work that needs to be done to figure out whether some of the, say, the text descriptions are actually reflective of what the activity is going on at these companies, but at least there's some circumstantial evidence that women startups work on different things and maybe are more skewed towards these positive externality areas or focus more on those areas. So again, let me pause. I probably went through some things really quickly, so I'm happy to go back to kind of specific findings if there was anything I can help clarify. Okay, so if there's no questions, I will then continue and then try to wrap up in the next 5 to 10 minutes. Um, so this part is probably less directly related to female entrepreneurship, but at the end I'll talk about how um, I would like to do more work or see more work thinking about quasi-experimental evidence related to female entrepreneurship or just more generally inclusive policies. So far in step one, the evidence I gave was purely descriptive. We collected observational data and just ran regressions. So you might think there's other factors that are maybe driving both outcomes at the same time, or maybe background just doesn't matter and we're just proxying for some other factors that affect the direction of innovation. What we try to do in step two of our paper is to provide some quasi-experimental evidence where we vary the social background of a given individual and then see if that changes their innovative activity down the road. And so in order to do that, we really need data that allows us to see variation in personal background and the subsequent entrepreneurial activity, in particular, being able to measure the direction of that activity. And so we couldn't find a really good American setting to do this. So we went to Finland for a solution where they kind of keep a much closer track of their population, are better able to track individuals over a longer time. And what we do with our research design is look at college program peers. So we try to exploit variation in the peer cohorts, controlling for very detailed program and university fixed effects. So for example, that tries to control for the fact that, say, the University of Helsinki in general has richer students from richer parental backgrounds. So we try to control for those and just look for idiosyncratic year-to-year variation. And what we do is verify empirically that these peer measures are unrelated to a host of an individual's pre-university measures. So obviously, Finland's data has a lot of measures, and so we test a bunch of these measures and kind of don't really find evidence that once we control for these university and program fixed effects, um, uh, that there's kind of biases that are created by our design. And then what we do is track subsequent entrepreneurial activity of individuals and compare it to the college program peer backgrounds. And so I won't kind of go into great detail about the formal regression framework, but it kind of incorporates a lot of the literature on peer effects and how to set it up correctly and deal with problems. We tested design validity to figure out if the characteristics of individuals before they join university are correlated with the peer measure. And this is like peer parental income. And so in general, we don't find any strong correlations. There's one out of like a dozen tests that comes out significant. We also do a different approach that's based on literature to test for validity. In general, we're pretty confident that this is isolating random variation, but again, this is never going to be 100% perfect. But what we end up finding with this design is that if you have lower income peers in college, down the line, you're more likely to start a business in a necessities industry. The effects aren't huge, as you can imagine, because it's only a sliver of your personal experience. And we might be kind of we're also measuring peers in a very inexact way. You could make friends randomly in college, or maybe you make friends that are more likely to be similar to you. So again, there's some noise in our analysis, but we do find significant effects, and the effects are driven by individuals with above median parental income. So potentially they start off only focusing on kind of luxury industries as areas they might potentially work in or start businesses in, and then through this peer exposure, they maybe start a business in a slightly less luxury industry. We don't find that peer effects have an impact on probability of entering entrepreneurship or on subsequent entrepreneurial income, both average and tail income. So we might think entrepreneur's goal is to become the 99th percentile income earner, but we don't see kind of an impact of peers on those particular outcomes, just on the industry that you choose to start a business. So that was just a brief glimpse of step 2. I'll share the link to our paper so that you can read a little bit more about what we do there. I wanted to close with a discussion of what I'd like to do or see more of in this area. So big picture implications from what we've done so far is that innovators' backgrounds seem to affect the types of new goods that they're bringing to market. And this has implications for equitable growth in a world where the innovation system, there's unequal access to the innovation system across groups. In terms of future work, I think I'd love to see more work or do more work understanding the benefits of female entrepreneurship and innovative activity. We have a little bit of, in terms of hiring in the paper from the Finland sample. And so, for example, maybe female entrepreneurs are better understanding workers who need flexibility. We have really talented workers who need flexibility. Those startups might make better use of those workers. There's social impact, which I alluded to in some of the results, but I think I'd love to see more on that. And I know the other week we had the presentation on local entrepreneurs and kind of improving the local community. That could even be kind of an area where we can make progress by seeing very detailed data. And then I think the reason I put the quasi-experimental stuff in the presentation is that it would be great to see evidence from any programs or initiatives or policies um, that manage to attract more women into entrepreneurship and innovation to see if to then trace those policies down the line. So policy A helps bring in more female engineers. What do they end up working on? And so that will start to suggest the characteristics of the innovations that we've been missing out on, or that we'd get if we kind of implemented programs more broadly. And there's also kind of an issue of who has influence over the direction of innovation and how much. So I've heard anecdotes from people who, mostly from academics who help out at these startup labs or incubators, that venture capital will sometimes be very even for female entrepreneurs who want to apply a technology to a particular area, the venture capitalists often have a say or encourage them to shift their direction towards something that the VC thinks is more lucrative or profitable. And so that could be an issue that's important to understand in terms of whether entrepreneurs and innovators have total say over the direction, or how much the funders or employers of these individuals have over the direction of innovation. But more work on that would also be really cool. So that's all I have for today. So thanks for tuning in, and I'd love to hear comments or questions that you have. But I will add the link to the.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was awesome. Virtual claps, I can see them here.
Okay.
I have some question. Okay, so we've got the link from Josh in the chat. Yeah, is there any, before I ask my questions, is there any questions from the audience?
I came late. Hi, it's Karen. Hello from
Hi.
Boston via Minneapolis. So shout out. I had said to shout out to Minneapolis originally. I came late. Which institution are you representing?
So I'm an assistant professor at the University of Utah.
Aha, got it. Oh, that's right. I remember. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I went to graduate school in Boston, so yeah, it's familiar.
Me too.
I think Monica had a question.
Okay, go ahead, Monica.
I'm good, thank you. I must have accidentally raised my hand. But thank you for the presentation.
Thanks.
Josh, I have a question. So,
Yeah.
when we see this connection and we see those correlations, I just kept wondering which way it goes. Is it that let's say female entrepreneurs would more advertise or network with more female clients, or customers are more drawn to those female entrepreneurs, in not even with thinking about the gender, but even other characteristics? Which way it goes, you think, or is it both ways?
Yeah, it's a little bit, yeah, like you said, it's just a correlation, so it could capture a variety of things. So initially with this project, I've been thinking about the entrepreneurial process and where in the process you can get divergence in the direction. So you could start off with different ideas, or you start off with the same ideas, but then just market them differently,
Yeah.
and get different customers. So any of those are definitely possible. Um, I've seen anecdotes, obviously, where some companies really advertise the identity of their founders, or like the background of their founders quite a bit. So then that's more direct, where consumers are drawn to the entrepreneur's characteristics. Yeah, it's tough to say. I'd love to unpack some of that, but it's also a case of then mapping that to how the entrepreneur should think about things, whether they should like advertise. I guess this is describing what they would naturally do, but then maybe they can do things differently in order to be more profitable. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm thinking most of this as going through the product. So the entrepreneur creates a product that then appeals differently to the customers. But yeah, I'd love to hear people's thoughts on drawing these distinctions and then maybe the implications of showing that, oh, it's not about advertising, it's about just maybe then like the entrepreneur should just openly like advertise their identity more um, or less, depending on what they're trying to do.
Graham, you have a question?
Yeah, hi, thanks for the presentation. And Agnieszka, I'm sorry that I've missed all but the first one of these. So, because Josh kept referring back to things that y'all had talked about that I'm like, oh man. But anyway, when you were talking about like, especially the venture capital funding, it reminded me of that movie Big with Tom Hanks, where it's like he's a 12-year-old kid and then the magic thing happens. And so he has this adult body and he gets hired at a toy company and he's like the product design marketing genius, because he's a kid, right? Who like understands it. And that movie is, 35 years old at this point, maybe, and it's just like, yeah, like if you fund entrepreneurship, from people who really understand who the target audience. I'm a marketing person, by the way. It just seems to be kind of a no-brainer. So it's really strange to me that there aren't just like that every fund doesn't have at least two women, as part of the
Mhm.
partnership. Like that is just really surprising to me. What I think the number was like 16% or something, that it was just really
Oh,
low.
yeah, I think that people are starting to change that. But then like VCs often hire former entrepreneurs, so then
Right.
it's like chicken and the egg type issue. But I think it is increasing, or at least the few prominent ones are discussing like minimum thresholds in terms of hiring women venture capital partners. But
Mhm.
maybe that's an area where people can study how these funds evolve over time.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Karen, you had a question? Karen, where is your hand? But we cannot hear you.
Sorry.
Okay.
Can you hear me
Okay.
now? Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
I can now.
It occurred to me that I wonder if you have ever brought this to like a brown bag lunch for a company like P&G or, a company that's deploying products and doing like a brown bag lunch at different levels with the company. Because the first thing that I thought of is that this information, I don't know, somehow there it could be useful for these companies targeting consumers and also working with entrepreneurs. I don't know if I'm on track with this, but that is something that occurred to me to do some sort of brown bag lunch and engage actual companies that are deploying new products to consumers and
Oh,
different
that's
demographics. This could be useful to them somehow. What do you
yeah.
think?
No, thanks for the suggestion, Karen. I mean, I'm not so kind of connected. I met one executive at P&G at a policy conference. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And these are issues that they do think about. And I think P&G in general has been better about these things. They certainly have one of the highest rates of female inventors in the data out of all companies. And then they also send their um, technical personnel to observe consumers, which was something that was interesting to hear. I think that's codified in some book about Procter and Gamble and their strategy. So Yeah,
They
I
also,
should definitely think more about
that's
that.
just one example. That was just an
Yeah.
example. I actually met the chief innovation officer years ago, and I got privy to this really cool open source innovation platform that they engage with to problem solve that with the open source kind of platform that anybody could come in and offer some solution to a challenge that they have. How they, if they're chosen, how they get compensated or any of that, I have no idea. But that's what it just occurred to me, PNG. But you could do General Mills, or you could do, many. I don't know what's in Utah, but I think it would be interesting to test it with a company doing some brown bag lunch.
Oh, that's a really helpful suggestion. It's not something I'm good at doing, but I can certainly look into it.
Would love to talk with you more about it.
Oh yeah, yeah, feel I can also leave my email.
I think
Yeah,
I
I
always
can
say how to have.
connect, yeah, I can connect you guys too. Yeah. Josh put his
Cool.
email
That'd be
in.
great.
Yeah.
Would like that. Yeah, I would like that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Karen.
Beautiful, Josh. So, any other questions from the audience? I would love to see more research in all the directions you say. I really appreciate you explaining all the data sources that we can use and the future research questions. I think there is a lot there, on the why and what the consequences of this is, which would be really great to see. I think this is a lot of potential. And we will, need to partner with some marketing people. Uh, yeah. Any other questions to Josh? Exactly. Okay, thank you so much. I really
Yeah,
appreciate your
thank you.
presentation and being here. Again, if you would like me to connect with Josh, send me an email and I will post the recording after on our webpage. Thanks so much for coming, and I invite you for to our next semester series that will take off for the summer. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending.
Hey,
Thanks again.
thanks for hosting these. Sorry I missed the first of them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Agnieszka. Thanks, Josh.
Graham, I'd love to connect with you as well, actually.
Yeah, is this Karen who's talking right now?
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah.
Yeah, here, let me put my email in the chat.
I'm sitting outside, so Ag,
Yeah,
will you send me?
I can definitely connect
Yeah.
you guys too.
And Brooke, if she's still, Brooke is she on? She's not on the line anymore.
She's not there.
Anyway, Graham, I'd love to chat because I'm looking for some marketing help, perhaps. So
All right, yeah, just send me an email and know that I will be completely underwater until at least May 16th. So,
no worries. My mom's birthday.
my dad's birthday also. So,
Wow,
yeah.
Taurus.
All right, well, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you for attending. Bye.
I'll look forward to you connecting me to Josh and Graham
Yep.
Yeah, that's great.
and talk soon. Bye, everybody.